Hey, what is going on, guys? My name's Slcmof and I'm back again with another video. And in today's video, I'd like to discuss the fact that there were not any boss fights in this season of Infamy. I guess you could consider the one at the Killer Croc side mission to be a boss fight. I mean, a kind of lousy one if you would consider it to be one. Actually, I mean, it was okay, you know, like when you do the dual team takedown on him the final time, and Batman or Nightwing, depending on who you're controlling, does a grapple down to his head and just smashes his head in the ground. So, I mean, that was a cool one. As for the other ones, I mean, see, like, here's the thing. You could technically consider there to be a tank boss fight at the end of the Mr. Freeze mission, but, I mean, let's face it. In terms of what we desire to be a boss fight, you know, there really weren't any. And I think that the reason I wouldn't really personally consider the Killer Croc side mission to have a boss fight is because of my video I made a few months ago about what makes a good boss fight. And I'll link that in the description below or in the annotation on the screen. And in that, you know, I basically, you know, sum it up for you so you don't have to watch it. Basically what I said is that, you know, if a boss fight involves the boss and only the boss, more so than anything else or anyone else, then, you know, that's an inherently good boss fight. So if you look at the best boss fights in the Arkham games, Killer Croc in Arkham Asylum, Mr. Freeze in Arkham City, those only involve, you know, Croc and Freeze. And then boss fights that maybe are not as good, like the Deathstroke boss fight, for example, in Batman Arkham Knight. Forget the fact it's in tanks. You know, you're not really fighting Deathstroke. You're fighting these other, you know, AI tanks. So that's why it's not as good. That's just an example. So, you know, the boss fight, Killer Croc's boss fight, we weren't really fighting Killer Croc. We were fighting thugs, and then we got our combo, and then we just did a dual team takedown on him. So, in my opinion, again, that's not, if it is a boss fight, it's not a very good one. But to me, and the reason that a lot of other people seemed a lot more disappointed by the fact there weren't boss fights, is that I wasn't really expecting them necessarily. I made a video saying I thought there would be some, and it's kind of weird that Coda did say, you know, we're working very hard to make sure there's boss fights in the season of Infamy, and there really weren't any. But by that post that Coda made a few months ago, where he basically was saying, we're working really hard to make sure there's boss fights in the season of Infamy for you guys, we should have known that there weren't going to be any boss fights. And I'm really glad that they kept it the way they did, and maybe added one boss fight in the end of the Killer Croc side mission, rather than try to shoehorn in boss fights and try to recreate a rushed Mr. Freeze 2.0 Arkham City boss fight that just wasn't as good as it, and all this kind of things. Like, would I really have wanted to see a Mr. Freeze boss fight? But yes, but the story and the narrative is much more convincing, where you're working with Mr. Freeze to find Nora, and you know how it all plays out. To me, that's much more interesting than this kind of like throwing out the end of the Arkham City side mission and creating this forced encounter between Batman and Mr. Freeze. It doesn't really make any sense. It doesn't make sense why would they would be fighting. And then we could start talking about Ghul and Mad Hatter, who, you know, they've never had good boss fights in the Arkham games. I mean, the Mad Hatter side mission in Arkham City was hardly a boss fight. The Ghul side mission, or boss fight in Arkham City, was pretty lackluster. I mean, it wasn't the best part of that game. I think we can all agree on that. Definitely wasn't the best boss fight in the game either. So basically what I'm getting at here is that besides the fact that there weren't any boss fights in the Season of Infamy, that really didn't hinder my enjoyment of the Season of Infamy, because I found that they told intriguing and great narratives that contributed to the Arkhamverse, whereas we hadn't gotten those in the previous DLC and the maybe even other the side missions in the main game that didn't really, you know, do that, like the militia missions and stuff like that. So because they had such rich narratives, especially the Ghul and Mr. Freeze side missions, I really wasn't bothered by there not being boss fights. I know a lot of people were. I think that they could have subbed out Mad Hatter and put in somebody like Prometheus and added a really kick-ass boss fight, but since they didn't, you know, it's still a great DLC expansion, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. So let me know your thoughts about there not being boss fights in the Season of Infamy. Did it really bother you, or are you kind of like me and it wasn't really your big concern? I think either, you know, thoughts are perfectly reasonable, and I think that a lot of people that were expecting boss fights and didn't get them are perfectly, you know, in their right to be mad or disappointed with there not being boss fights, especially after our harsh critique of there not being boss fights in the main game. I really thought there would be more boss fights, but, you know, there wasn't, and I think that I still enjoyed the Season of Infamy nonetheless. Hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe for more Batman v Superman, Batman Arkham Knight, and Batman Telltale 2016 coverage. Like the video if you enjoyed. We'll see you in the next video.